Paris smelled of burnt sugar and scorched meat. It is March 18, AD 1314. On a small, muddy island in the middle of the Seine River, a man is cooking over a slow fire. His name is Jacques de Molay. He is the final Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and as the flames lick his skin, he is not begging for mercy. He is shouting curses through the black smoke, screaming that the king and the pope will stand before the judgment seat of God within the year. It is a cinematic death. A holy spectacle. But if you strip away the religion, the smoke, and the tragedy, you are looking at something much more mundane. You are looking at a total, catastrophic business collapse. De Molay did not just die for a faith, he died because of a bad strategy. He genuinely believed his multinational corporation was too big to fail. He believed God guarded his vaults of gold. He believed a holy brand identity could protect him from a broke king's aggressive accountants. He was dead wrong. Far to the north, in the frozen swamps of the Baltic coast, another brotherhood wearing white cloaks watched the smoke drift across the European sky. They did not weep for their fallen brothers. They did not write poetry about the martyrs. They opened their ledgers and drew a completely cold, calculating conclusion. Ideas do not turn back heavy cavalry. Prayers do not fund frontier garrisons. But land? Land does not vanish. Land cannot be seized by a French king's midnight raid. They chose land. This is the story of the Teutonic Knights, not as the romantic legend of shining armor and noble quests, but as the most ruthless, efficient corporation of the Middle Ages. They were white-cloaked operators who systematically swapped the cross for a property contract. While the Templars built monuments of gold and stone in the centers of European power, the Teutonic Knights built a sovereign state of brick, iron, and absolute silence on the bones of tribes nobody remembers. They outlasted the Templars because they understood one fundamental rule of the market that de Molay forgot: survival is the only virtue worth keeping. They did not wait for a heavenly kingdom, they took the future by force. Before we dive into the blood and the bank accounts of this medieval machine, we need to understand exactly how the board of directors changed the game. The fire on the Isle aux Juifs did not just consume the flesh of Jacques de Molay, it incinerated an entire era of medieval banking. To understand the cold-blooded rise of the Teutonic Knights, one must first look at the ashes of the Knights Templar. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars were the undisputed masters of the Christian financial world. They had invented modern international banking. A pilgrim could walk into a Templar preceptory, a regional headquarters, in London, deposit 100 silver coins, receive a coded ledger note, and withdraw the equivalent value in the desert outpost of Acre. They were a sovereign entity answerable only to the Pope. They held tax exemptions that drove local bishops mad. They accumulated vast agricultural estates, urban real estate, and a fleet of commercial ships. They were, by any modern definition, too big to fail. But their entire corporate structure rested on a single, massive vulnerability. Their brand identity was tied entirely to a product that was rapidly losing its market. That product was the Crusades. When the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem fell, the Templars lost their primary operational theater. They were no longer the vanguard of Christ, they were an armed, immensely wealthy private army sitting inside European kingdoms, operating a shadow banking system that sovereign kings could neither control nor tax. In Paris, the Templars built a fortress headquarters that functioned as the de facto treasury of the French monarchy. King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, was a ruler with a permanent cash flow problem. He had spent years fighting expensive, indecisive wars with the English and the Flemish. He had debased his own currency, reducing the silver content of French coins until the economy suffered from runaway inflation. He had expelled the Jewish moneylenders and confiscated their property. He had forced the Italian Lombard bankers out of the country. Still, the crown's balance sheet was drowning in red ink. And the Templars held the debt. Philip owed the order nearly 500,000 livres, an amount that would have bankrupted the Kingdom of France several times over. Philip did not look at the Templars as holy warriors. He looked at them as an undervalued asset that could be liquidated to balance his budget. On the morning of Friday, October 13, AD 1307, the French crown struck. In a highly coordinated, lightning military operation that caught the order completely off guard, the king's men broke through the gates of every Templar property in France simultaneously. 15,000 men were arrested in their beds. The charges were meticulously prepared by the king's lawyers: heresy, spitting on the cross, institutional sodomy, and worshipping a mysterious severed head named Baphomet. The truth did not matter, the bureaucracy did. For 7 agonizing years, the royal administrative machine worked over the prisoners. In candlelit stone rooms across France, royal clerks sat with inkpots and parchment, recording confessions extracted by the steady tightening of thumbscrews and the systematic burning of the soles of the knights' feet. By the time Jacques de Molay was brought to the small island in the Seine in 1314, the corporate infrastructure of the Templars had been completely broken. The Pope had dissolved the order under royal pressure. Their gold was gone, absorbed into the royal treasury or transferred to their rivals under heavy processing fees. De Molay stood in the smoke, shouting his final, desperate appeal to a higher court. Far to the north, in the dark timber fortresses along the Baltic Sea, the senior administrators of the Teutonic Knights read the reports arriving from Paris. They did not organize prayer vigils. They did not send diplomatic protests to Rome. They looked at the ruins of the Templar Empire and performed a cold-blooded post-mortem. The lesson was simple, brutal, and undeniable: a religious brand is useless if a sovereign king can lock your doors and seize your vaults. The Templars had built an empire of paper credit, gold bullion, and urban estates within the borders of powerful kings. They were tenants in someone else's house. The Teutonic Knights decided they would never be tenants. They would not put their faith in gold chests that could be carried away by royal guards. They would put their faith in something permanent, solid, and impossible to liquidate overnight. They would build an empire out of land. Not scattered estates in France or Germany, but an entire sovereign territory where the Grand Master was the king, the landlord, and the tax collector all at once. If the world was a game of real estate, the Teutonic Knights were about to buy the entire board. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. To build an empire out of land, you must first survive the collapse of your original market. Before the smoke rose over Paris, the entire crusading ecosystem suffered a terminal systemic failure on the sun-baked coast of the Mediterranean. It is May 18, AD 1291. The place is Acre, the last great Christian stronghold in the Holy Land. For 6 weeks, the Mamluk Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil had battered the city's double ring of stone walls with 92 massive catapults. The air smelled of sulfur, rotting flesh, and the sweet, sick scent of burning Greek fire. The defense of Acre was not a heroic stand, it was a desperate, uncoordinated attempt to save an underwater asset. The Teutonic Knights, along with the Templars and Hospitallers, held the walls. They fought from tower to tower, but the numbers were mathematically impossible. 60,000 Mamluk cavalry and 100,000 infantry poured through the breaches. When the accursed tower fell, the city became a slaughterhouse. The Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, Burchard von Schwanden, had resigned his post just a year earlier, sensing the impending liquidation of the Levantine enterprise. His successor, Conrad von Feuchtwangen, stood on the crumbling ramparts and watched the world he knew end. The Mamluk engineers did not just sack the city, they executed a total environmental and architectural erasure. They systematically blew up the massive stone walls, pulled down the great palaces, and burned the warehouses. To ensure the Christians could never return, the Sultan ordered the harbor filled with the rubble of the city's own towers. The great port that had funded the Crusades for a century was turned into a shallow, useless swamp of broken stone. The structural collapse, the loss of Acre, was not just a military defeat, it was the definitive end of the Crusader business model in the East. The Holy War product line was officially dead. The Hospitallers retreated to the island of Rhodes, turning themselves into Mediterranean pirates in the name of Christ. The Templars moved back to their urban banks in Paris and London, a fatal decision that left them exposed to debt-ridden monarchs. But the Teutonic Knights did something far more pragmatic. Conrad von Feuchtwangen moved the order's headquarters temporarily to Venice, the most liquid and cynical financial hub in Europe. Sitting in the lagoon of Venice, away from the immediate control of the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor, the order's high command performed a critical pivot. The Levant was a saturated, bankrupt market. But Europe had a northern frontier. For nearly 60 years, a small contingent of Teutonic brothers had been operating in the dark forests of Prussia, fighting a brutal, low-intensity war against the native pagan tribes. The High Command realized that while the Templars were counting coins in France, the Order's true future lay in the vast, timber-rich wilderness of the Baltic. The pagan Prussians did not have walled cities or international alliances. They had land. Endless, untamed, valuable land filled with timber, amber, and fertile soil. Conrad von Feuchtwangen understood that to survive as a military corporation, the Order needed a monopoly on an entirely new territory. In AD 1309, his successor, Siegfried von Feuchtwangen, made the definitive move. He packed the Order's secret archives, its holy relics, and its treasury into a fleet of ships, left Venice, and sailed north. He did not stop in Germany. He rode straight into the fortress of Marienburg on the Nogat River. By moving the corporate headquarters to the frontier, the Teutonic Knights severed their dependence on European politics. They were no longer a charity waiting for donations from pious kings, they were an armed state executive establishing total dominion over a new world. The cross on their white cloaks was no longer a symbol of pilgrimage, it was a corporate logo marking ownership over every tree, river, and soul from the Vistula to the Niemen. When Siegfried von Feuchtwangen stepped through the gates of Marienburg in AD 1309, he was not entering a simple military outpost. He was occupying the corporate headquarters of an aggressive, modern colonization machine. The land the Teutonic Knights claimed was a dense, trackless wilderness of ancient oak forests, black mud dal-dal, swamps, and freezing rivers. The native pagan Prussians, divided into fiercely independent tribes like the Pomesanians, Pagans, and Natangians, had spent centuries turning back Polish and German kings. They fought from hidden woodland strongholds and vanished into the bogs at the first sign of heavy cavalry. The Teutonic Knights did not try to win their hearts. They systematically dismantled their world through stone, timber, and logistics. The strategy was an exercise in pure spatial economics. The Order built an unbroken network of brick and stone fortresses, known as Ordensburgen, along the major river systems of the Vistula and the Pregel. Each fortress was positioned exactly 1 day's march from the next. If a native rebellion broke out, a messenger could ride to the nearest stronghold, and a relief column of heavy cavalry could arrive within 12 hours. These were not defensive hideouts, they were offensive command centers designed to project force and extract resources. The anatomy of an Ordensburgen fortress. Unlike the romantic stone castles of Western Europe, the Teutonic fortresses were constructed entirely from millions of heavy red bricks, manufactured in on-site kilns using local clay. They were stark, unadorned, and functionally identical. The Knights realized early on that a military force of fewer than 1,000 elite brothers could not hold an entire country by sword alone. They needed to import a workforce. The Order sent recruiters across the Holy Roman Emperor's territories, into Saxony, Thuringia, and the Rhineland, offering a highly lucrative startup package to German settlers. If a peasant family moved to Prussia, the Order granted them free land, tax-free status for the first 10 years, and protection under a unified legal code known as the Kulm Law, Kulmer Handfest. Thousands of families answered the call. They brought with them heavy iron plows that could turn the thick, stubborn soil of the Baltic lowlands. They cut down the ancient forests to build structured, grid-patterned agricultural villages. Where there had been trackless wilderness, there were now neatly measured fields of wheat, barley, and rye. But the Order's true economic masterstroke was the subjugation of the rivers. By controlling the Vistula River, the Teutonic state held a complete monopoly on the flow of grain from the Polish interior to the Baltic Sea. They founded commercial cities along the water, Thorn, Elbing, Danzig, and Königsberg, and forced them into the Hanseatic League, a powerful network of merchant guilds. Every single boat carrying timber, wax, or wheat down the river had to stop at a Teutonic toll station. The Order did not just tax the trade, they became the ultimate traders. The Grand Master appointed a senior official known as the Großschaffer, Grand Merchant, who operated a state-backed trading corporation. He used the Order's tax revenues to buy up local grain at below-market rates during harvest season, stored it in the massive granaries of Marienburg, and then sold it at a massive premium to famine-stricken cities in England and Flanders during the winter. By AD 1350, the Teutonic Knights were no longer just a collection of crusader monks. They were the absolute rulers of a highly profitable, self-sustaining corporate state. Their bureaucracy was flawless, their treasury was overflowing, and their brand was synonymous with absolute efficiency. But in their rush to maximize their balance sheets, they had created a dangerous internal friction. The very German merchants and wealthy burghers they had imported to build their cities were beginning to realize that the white cloaks were no longer their protectors. They were their competitors. By the late 14th century, the Teutonic state had reached its absolute corporate zenith. Under Grand Master Winrich von Nipperode, the order was running the most disciplined administrative apparatus in the Western world. While European kings were still relying on illiterate feudal barons to collect taxes via intimidation, the Teutonic Knights used a professional network of priors and votes, local administrators, who logged every bushel of wheat and every pound of Baltic amber in leather-bound ledger books. Marienburg Castle had grown into the largest brick fortress on Earth, a labyrinth of vaulted ceilings, hypocaust underfloor heating systems, and state-of-the-art armories. But a corporation built entirely around a military mission faces a structural crisis when its original operational purpose disappears. The order's official mandate from the Pope was the conversion of the last pagans of Europe. For decades, they had run a highly lucrative, crusader tourism industry. Every winter, when the Baltic bogs and rivers froze over into solid ice highways, aristocratic knights from England, France, and Germany, including the future King Henry IV of England, would travel north to participate in the Reise, the journey. This was a seasonal, high-society winter campaign where Western nobles hunted pagan Lithuanians in the forests, earned spiritual indulgences, and feasted at the Grand Master's table in Marienburg under banners of silk and gold. Then, in AD 1386, the market shifted overnight. The Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jogaila, looked at the maps and realized his fragmented pagan lands were being systematically eaten away by the Teutonic machine. He executed a brilliant geopolitical merger. He agreed to convert to Catholicism, marry the 11-year-old Queen Jadwiga of Poland, and unite the Grand Duchy of Lithuania with the Kingdom of Poland under a single crown. He took the Christian name the Ladislaw to Jagiello. With a single signature, the entire theological justification for the Teutonic state collapsed. Lithuania was now a Christian nation. There were no more pagans to convert on the Baltic frontier. The existential crisis: if the enemy is Catholic, the Reise is no longer a holy crusade, it is an illegal invasion of Christian territory. The order's core product line was officially obsolete. The Teutonic Knights refused to accept the reality of the market. To acknowledge Lithuania's conversion meant acknowledging that their armed corporate state no longer had a reason to exist. The order's propaganda machine in Europe went into overdrive. They sent letters to the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor claiming Jagiello's conversion was a fraud, a sham designed to protect pagans who still worshipped snakes and oak trees in secret. The friction built up over 2 decades along the borderlands. The order continued to seize Polish trading ships on the Vistula and aggressively tax Prussian merchants who traded with Krakow. They squeezed their own subjects to fund an increasingly expensive standing army of foreign mercenaries. By AD 1410, the escalation reached its boiling point. The Ladislaw II Jagiello of Poland and his cousin, Grand Duke Vytautas of Lithuania, decided to launch a joint venture to break the Teutonic monopoly once and for all. They mobilized a massive, multi-ethnic coalition: Polish heavy lancers, Lithuanian light cavalry, Bohemian mercenaries, and even Tatar horse archers from the eastern steppes. The Grand Master of the Order, Ulrich von Jungingen, was an aggressive, old-school executive who believed entirely in the military supremacy of his elite heavy knights. He mobilized the full strength of the order. On July 15, AD 1410, the two largest military forces of the medieval world faced each other near the villages of Grunwald and Tannenberg. The battle was a catastrophic strategic failure for the order. Ulrich von Jungingen deployed his heavy cavalry in the blazing summer heat, forcing them to sit in their heavy iron armor for hours while Jagiello deliberately delayed the attack from the shade of the forest. When the lines finally clashed, the tactical flexibility of the Polish-Lithuanian alliance broke the rigid Teutonic formation. The Lithuanian light cavalry feigned a retreat, drawing the overconfident knights into a disorganized pursuit, only to wheel back and surround them. By late afternoon, the field of Grunwald was a slaughterhouse of white cloaks. Ulrich von Jungingen was cut down in the melee, his golden chain of office trampled into the mud. The entire executive board of the Teutonic state, the Grand Commander, the Grand Marshal, the Treasurer, perished in a single afternoon. The military spine of the machine had been broken. The morning after Grunwald, the Teutonic state was effectively an empty shell. Its entire executive board was dead, its field army was gone, and the Polish vanguard was riding hard for Marienburg. The Ladislaw II Jagiello expected a swift, corporate surrender. He was wrong. As we saw earlier, a mid-level manager named Heinrich von Plauen seized the reins of power, burned Marienburg town to the ground to clear his field of fire, and managed the subsequent 8-week siege with the cold precision of an auditor. Von Plauen saved the capital. He outlasted the Polish army through strict rationing, meticulous guard rotations, and sheer, stubborn survival tactics. But his reward for saving the corporation was a masterclass in institutional pettiness. On November 9, AD 1410, von Plauen was officially elected Grand Master. But the surviving brother knights, the wealthy aristocrats who had sat safely in Western Germany while the empire crumbled, deeply resented him. They looked at him not as a savior, but as a low-ranking bureaucrat who had stepped out of his social class to command his betters. Every day von Plauen sat in the Grand Master's chair was a physical reminder of their own failure on the field of Grunwald. The internal coup, when von Plauen attempted to raise taxes to rebuild the treasury and launch a preemptive strike against Poland in AD 1413, his own Grand Marshal, Michael Koopmeister, staged a military coup. Von Plauen was arrested in his quarters while eating breakfast and thrown into a dungeon. The brothers did not just depose him, they erased him. When von Plauen died broken and forgotten in AD 1429, they refused to enter his name on the order's official commemoration roll. By betraying the only competent manager they had left, the Teutonic Knights sealed their own terminal decline. What followed was a 40-year period of systemic, irreversible rot. The Prussian cities, Danzig, Thorn, Elbing, and Königsberg, had grown incredibly wealthy under the order's early protection. Their waterfront warehouses were packed with valuable Baltic trade goods, and their merchant town halls featured imported German stained glass. But they were tired of paying soaring taxes to fund the order's mounting war debts and paying for the upkeep of rowdy mercenary garrisons who occupied their streets for free. In February AD 1454, the major cities officially broke their contracts. They formed a rebel alliance called the Prussian Confederation in the town of Thorn, in the exact same town hall where a young Nicholas Copernicus would later be baptized. Within 6 weeks, 56 Teutonic castles fell to the local citizens, often without a single shot fired. In many towns, German settlers systematically tore down the red brick fortresses brick by brick, using the materials to expand their own harbor walls. The cities offered their allegiance to King Casimir IV of Poland, triggering the devastating 13 Years' War, 1454 to 1467. It was a war of pure financial attrition that the bankrupted order could never win. The ultimate humiliation came in AD 1457. The Teutonic Knights had no money left to pay their elite Czech mercenaries, led by a seasoned captain named Oldrich Cervenka. The Grand Master, Ludwig von Ehrlichhausen, had defaulted on their wages for 3 consecutive years. So, the mercenaries did what any unpaid contractors would do: they took the collateral. They negotiated directly with the enemy. On a foggy dawn in 1457, the greatest brick fortress on earth changed hands not through a bloody siege, but for cold, hard cash. The Czech mercenaries sold Marienburg Castle to the King of Poland for 190,000 Hungarian florins. The keys to the invincible stronghold were handed over in a velvet bag at the main gate. The Grand Master himself had to escape through a side postern gate at night, riding away in a borrowed cart with a single chest of holy relics and the order's official seal. The war dragged on until the Second Peace of Thorn in AD 1466. The terms were a total corporate liquidation. The order lost West Prussia entirely, including Marienburg, Elbing, and the lucrative Vistula River toll stations. They were forced to move their capital east to the isolated outpost of Königsberg. Worst of all, the Grand Master had to kneel in the mud before the Polish king and swear a humiliating oath of fealty as a vassal. The independent sovereign state conjured out of thin legal paper by Hermann von Salza in 1226 was now a mere satellite province of its oldest adversary. The final act of the Teutonic state did not take place on a muddy battlefield, but in the crowded market square of Krakow on April 10, AD 1525. 14 years earlier, in a desperate bid to restructure their failing enterprise, the remaining brother knights had elected a new Grand Master, 21-year-old Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach. Albert was an aristocratic insider, a member of the powerful Hohenzollern family, and a nephew of the Polish king Sigismund I. The aging brotherhood hoped his royal bloodline would secure them a debt write-off. But Albert was a modern executive who looked at his inheritance and saw a corporate corpse. The treasury was empty. The entire order had shrunk to fewer than 200 elderly, mostly illiterate monks. The old medieval product line, crusading, monastic vows, and papal protections, was completely bankrupt. Meanwhile, across the German border, a massive market disruption was unfolding. In October 1517, a monk named Martin Luther had nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, sparking the Protestant Reformation. Catholic institutions were being dissolved overnight, and German princes were aggressively seizing monastic lands. In late November 1523, Albert traveled to Wittenberg in plain clothes. He met with Martin Luther in his private study for 3 consecutive evenings. Albert did not go to seek spiritual guidance, he went to pitch a corporate buyout. Luther's advice was immediate and entirely pragmatic. Discard your monastic vows. Get married. Disband the order, take the land for yourself, and convert the territory into a hereditary, secular duchy. Move first, or lose everything. Albert returned to Königsberg and executed the plan with absolute precision. On that spring morning in Krakow, known to history as the Prussian Homage, Albert knelt before his uncle, King Sigismund of Poland. He was no longer wearing the white mantle with the black cross, his valet had packed it away into a wooden chest at dawn. He was dressed as a secular Renaissance prince in a fur-lined cloak of black sable. Albert placed his hands between the king's hands and swore fealty as the first Duke of Prussia. With a single signature, the monastic state of the Teutonic Order was legally dissolved. The vast territories built on the bones of pagan tribes became the personal, hereditary property of the Hohenzollern dynasty. The remaining brother knights were offered a simple choice: convert to Lutheranism and become landed vassals under Duke Albert, or pack their bags. Most chose to stay. The 55 hardcore traditionalists who refused retreated to small, scattered properties in southern Germany and Austria, eventually shrinking over the centuries into a small charitable society in Vienna that still exists today, running mountain hospitals and elderly care homes. But the corporate DNA of the Teutonic state did not die out in the Austrian Alps. It evolved. Albert's secular duchy of Prussia grew systematically over the next 2 centuries. In AD 1618, it merged with the Margraviate of Brandenburg. In AD 1701, Albert's descendant, Frederick I, marched into the old Teutonic capital of Königsberg and crowned himself king in Prussia. He placed the crown on his own head, signaling that his power recognized no superior authority on earth, neither pope nor emperor. The Kingdom of Prussia grew into the most terrifyingly disciplined military machine in Europe. Its armies were drilled on the exact same principles of absolute obedience, bureaucratic efficiency, and ruthless logistics that the Teutonic Knights had perfected in their red brick fortresses. In AD 1871, the Prussian king was proclaimed emperor of a unified Germany in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The Templars had chosen martyrdom and left behind a beautiful, tragic legend for Hollywood films. The Teutonic Knights chose survival, adaptation, and corporate rebranding. They outlived their rivals because they understood that when a system fails, you do not die for the brand, you change the layout, rewrite the contracts, and conquer the future. The black cross that the warrior monks carried into the Baltic mud in 1231 would ultimately be painted on the wings of German aircraft through 2 world wars, a dark, unbroken thread of survival cutting straight through the gears of European history. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.